Hello, today I'm going to be talking about Caravaggio and how his life on the run may have influenced his later works of art. We always call this guy the bad boy of art history, and he's known for his aggressive personality, but we gotta give him credit. He innovatively showcased stories in some high quality oil paintings in a variety of ways. There's sensual, religious piety, and violence. And those are the types of paintings we're going to be focusing on today. Because, you know, we talk about Caravaggio being the bad boy of Italian art, but why? Why is it significant that he was a bad boy? And did this have anything to do with his career as an artist? That's the question I'm attempting to answer in my paper. Did Caravaggio's criminal record, history and violence, and life on the run have any influence in his art? I argue yes, and here's why. I'm not going to go super in depth about his criminal record, but I'm just going to give a few stories for some context. He consorted with prostitutes, prowled regularly on the street, and was in and out of Rome's notorious medieval jail, and at times homeless. And then there's my favorite story of Caravaggio, and it's just really good at showing how aggressive he is, and it's about the resurrection of Lazarus. An infuriated and desperate Caravaggio drew his dagger and cut the painting into shreds, as if taking the process of rejection into his own hands. The story easily shows the kind of person Caravaggio must have been, with that much emotion, showing that much destruction over something that they created. Kind of reminds me of something like this. And these are just the kind of vibes he gave off. So, he was an intense person, super aggressive. He poured boiling oil on someone over how he didn't like the food. Gordon Ramsay wouldn't even do that. So now that I've proven that this man has had a wild side, to say the absolute least, we can talk about a few paintings and how his life on the run may have influenced them and these later works, and kind of see how they've evolved. The three things I'll be focusing on in these paintings is the treatment of the subject, what moment did Caravaggio choose to paint, the use of blood, and the facial expressions of the figures. These elements will reveal a lot, not only about the stories, but the mindset that Caravaggio had going on in the paintings. The first painting we're going to be looking at today was under speculation if it was actually Caravaggio's, but I have multiple sources that argue it's his. It's The Crowning of Thorns. This features the mocking of Jesus before he was nailed to the cross, which is a unique moment to capture of this subject. We usually see depictions of Jesus performing miracles, nailed to the cross already, and the moments of him walking out of the tomb days later. The treatment of the subject or moment Caravaggio chose to paint in the subject story is chosen to show the betrayal of. We can see this from the sharp line of light that shines on Christ as the men work on mocking him. They also hide their faces from it. So this is a very specific moment that Caravaggio chose to paint, and it focuses on the portrayal of the humans rather than showing Jesus making a sacrifice. It shows humans doing him wrong. Then there's the use of blood in the painting, which comes from its title, The Crown of Thorns, that sits atop Christ's head. There's not too much blood, and it drips down from his head like the tears that he can't even shed in this moment. So again, we see the crown of thorns is what we placed on him, and it's causing him very, very much grief and distraught. And we can see that from his facial expression. The main figure, Jesus, has his eyes barely open, limped body, which we can see is loosely based on the Belvedere torso, and his face can't even be described as somber acceptance of defeat and death. He knows this has to happen, and he's not fighting it. His neck is so limp, his face follows a horizontal line. You just see that this is the face and body of someone who has slumped over, given up. This is the face of someone betrayed and accepting death. And I like to think that this kind of marks the pattern of the three elements we're going to see more of them in the other paintings. We have his facial expression, the blood, and the subject. In this next painting, we've seen it a couple times, David with the head of Goliath, or it should be called with the head of Caravaggio, because as we know, it is unmistakably him. As far as the treatment goes, this one is actually quite similar to those of other scenes painted of the two. The only differences I can make out, the rest is the size of Caravaggio's head. Although Caravaggio's Although David's head is very small, he's further back in the picture plane. With David holding the head outward, it makes the head seem just a bit bigger. It's supposed to be the head of a giant, and it's not that giant. I thought this was either Caravaggio having more trouble with anatomy or him trying to solidify the idea that he sees himself as the monster, and he doesn't need to be a giant to wreak havoc on a town, a more naturalized monster, I suppose. And then there's the use of blood. It kind of spews out of the head in this not so natural way, kind of reminds me of a Tarantino movie. These strings of blood spewing out from the base of the head, and then there's this little scar on his forehead, which is a reference to a crime he committed, leaving him with a scar just the same. And this detail really shows that at the time, Caravaggio sees himself as evil, undeserving of forgiveness and more deserving of punishment or death. And then, of course, his face, the same as all the others we're going to see. Just accepting this fate, he almost looks as if saying, yeah, I get it. I would have slain me too. We have the classic mouth agape, but it's not an essential way anymore. It's the face of someone giving in to the situation, and that's saying a lot for the situation being his death. And you can kind of see what I mean by comparing these facial expressions to Caravaggio's Medusa. She's another monster he painted, and with the same beheading concept, so her face is the complete opposite. She does not accept this, nor does she think she deserves it. Sometimes I look at this painting and I can hear her screaming, no! And yeah, it's this difference that we're talking about here that shows this kind of pattern in his later work. Perhaps while on the run, Caravaggio realized he would never get his pardons and just didn't deserve them. Nevertheless, he still tried and he still painted. So this last painting we're going to be looking at for these same patterns is his last known work, The Martyrdom of Saint Ursula. The treatment of this subject was really interesting to me. Caravaggio loved these very minute moments just to show these intense scenes of death and despair. The man's hand just left the bow, and all of their reactions are visible. You know, they instantly regret it. They're all like, oh, what did you do? The arrow just pierced her skin. In order to depict the martyrdom, Caravaggio showed the moment the king of the Huns really messed up, and he successfully does that. It helps the viewer focus on the portrayal. Just like the other elements do, like the use of blood. Again, very minimal. He doesn't need too much to tell the story he's trying to tell. The blood is just starting to stain her dress and spurts out of her chest, and she goes to hold it, which again focuses on that betrayal. And most importantly, her face, which bows down as if the last thing she will see is that wound and the arrow piercing her body. It doesn't scream or yell out, it's just accepting the current situation, which is her death. And all of these elements, the blood, the treatment of the subject, and their solemn faces, are part of the changes we see in Caravaggio's later years. And it really has a lot to do with his experience running from the law, seeing all these terrible things, but also being the reason why you're on the run in the first place. He had a lot of intense emotions, conflicting emotions, and they start to come out a bit more in his later works because of this. Thank you so much for listening. I had a lot of fun making this, and yeah.